mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Brazier with Ducks Unlimited. Most of you out there will know that highly pathogenic avian influenza is a big topic in the waterfowl community right now. And we have with us Dr. Julie Lenoch of USDA Wildlife Services to provide us with some very important guidance that waterfowl hunters need to be aware of. Dr. Lenoch, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Waterfowl hunters are a very key group of individuals in this fight, really, to limit the spread of highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so if you had an opportunity in a very short moment of time, 2 or 3 minutes, to tell waterfowl hunters what kind of steps they can take to help mitigate the risk of spreading highly pathogenic avian influenza to backyard poultry flocks, commercial poultry flocks, what would that key guidance be?
It's a great question and a really good opportunity. And we certainly understand that the waterfowl hunters play a very key role in multiple parts of this surveillance and our response. As you know, we've been detecting high path avian influenza basically coast to coast at this point in the 2022 outbreak. We have detections in wild birds in all 4 flyways. And we've been, under the outbreak since middle of January of 2022. We do appreciate the work that we get from the waterfowl hunters, both in letting us sample the birds that come in through duck hunting, and also to report when there are sick or dead birds out in the environment that we may need to go test to determine if there are other species beyond our hunted waterfowl, the migratory waterfowl that we typically use for our surveillance sampling. We do want to stress that we've detected this high path avian influenza in over 85 different species this year, and we are seeing many more types of birds that are becoming sick or are dying from infection. Waterfowl hunters and our game enthusiasts have a very important role both in helping us understand where the disease may be and in being careful and taking extra precautions to prevent any avian influenza moving through people or vehicles or other equipment back to where it could infect commercial birds. The word highly pathogenic refers to the amount of disease it causes in domestic chickens and turkeys. And that's really an important point to stress, is that everything that we can do to avoid any contamination or movement of the virus into backyard birds. If somebody is a waterfowl hunter and also owns backyard chickens, we want to stress the importance of avoiding any contact or movement there. Or if you happen to work at a poultry industry or live near commercial poultry, it's really important to not handle any wild birds that are sick or dead, to change gloves and shoes and make sure that there's no contact of equipment or other things that could potentially move the virus into a new area where it can cause catastrophic effects in our domestic birds.
And with regard to how waterfowl hunters should process their birds, that's one of the big questions that people have is, okay, I'm harvesting waterfowl. I have to clean them. I have to care for the meat, and then I have to dispose of the carcass. What's the guidance to waterfowl hunters on how to most carefully and appropriately handle harvested waterfowl, and then for cleaning it and disposing of the carcasses?
Great question. We do recommend to only harvest waterfowl that look and behave in a healthy manner. The disease has caused a sudden death, but also some neurologic signs and just some slow behavior, tremors. So we don't advise handling any sick or dead game. if it's possible, doing field dress in a well-ventilated outdoor area and wearing rubber gloves or some other type of disposable gloves when handling and cleaning the game. We do recommend removing and discarding the intestines and avoiding any contact with that, and placing those in plastic bags and disposing where scavengers or other animals could not get access to the intestinal contents. This is true in dressing of all wild game, but specifically for this outbreak, we don't want people to be eating or drinking or smoking while handling or processing the game, which could potentially cause some ingestion or some movement toward your face. And just a general good rule is when you're done handling the game, wash hands with soap and water, or use an alcohol-based sanitizer. We're all used to this with COVID precautions, but the same rules apply when handling game. Use proper cleaning of knives or equipment or any type of tools that you might be used when processing and field dressing the game.
And what about gear that may be very commonly used in waterfowl hunting? And I'm thinking mainly waders and other boots. And this is probably a concern mostly with backyard poultry flocks. I don't know that people are going to go into a commercial facility wearing waders, but for those people that have those backyard flocks that go hunting, and even their four-wheeler, their trailer, things that may come in contact with that water, what guidance can you provide on how to most appropriately clean those pieces of gear or equipment?
Really, it's relatively simple. Clean and disinfect the clothing that you wear, the footwear and hunting gear before traveling to another area. So those waders, if it's possible, wash with soap and water and then let dry. And a simple disinfection with a 1 to 10 dilution of household bleach, just regular household bleach, for 10 minutes will kill this virus. Anything that you can do to prevent transmission or any clothes that were worn or equipment that was worn or used out in a field, we don't want that to come into contact, especially with backyard, poultry, or if there happens to be like a falcon or any other type of birds that might be susceptible. We want to avoid that transmission from waterfowl hunting into any of those other susceptible birds.
Dr. Lenoch, thank you so much for that great insight. For people that want to learn more about all the details behind high-path avian influenza and even more guidance and precautions that we can be taking, keep your eyes open for a forthcoming episode of the Ducks Unlimited podcast where we will be talking in more detail with Dr. Lenoch about this very issue. Dr. Lenoch, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the ducks. Stay tuned to the ducks.